Okay, let's get into it. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are taking on, well, a truly rich and complex set of source material centered entirely on late Victorian England.
Mm.
And our mission here is to really examine the high-stakes pursuits and the very complicated, often volatile relationships of this group of incredibly modern individuals.
And they're all confronting this deep-rooted Essex legend.
Exactly.
And, I think what makes this deep dive so fascinating for you, the listener, is seeing these powerful forces just collide. We're exploring this tension between a kind of burgeoning scientific rationalism
Right.
and these urgent, sometimes radical social reform movements, things like the battle for fair housing in London.
And all of that is set against the enduring power of myth and superstition, especially as it takes hold on the raw, muddy landscape of the Blackwater coast.
That's elemental.
And our source material, it gives us this immediate, almost I'd say jarring shift in both location and philosophy. It kicks off in the very rigid high society of London.
A world where status, reputation, that's everything, especially in the wake of a pretty prominent death.
And then, suddenly, we're transported out to the raw environment of Aldwinter in Essex.
Yeah, exactly. And we follow this intense intellectual and emotional journey that touches on such extremes. I mean, we're dealing with the absolute cutting edge of medicine,
The first steps towards heart surgery.
the very first tentative steps.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you see this fierce political engagement, people trying to stitch the social fabric of the city back together.
And all the while, these characters are being drawn, almost pulled, toward this primal mystery.
The hunt for a legendary sea monster.
The Essex Serpent. So to help you synthesize all this whirlwind of conflicting information, we've structured this deep dive around three core themes. First, we're looking at the price of freedom. Specifically, how the central character, Cora Seaborne, uses the unexpected liberty of widowhood to shed these suffocating societal expectations.
And pursue her real intellectual passions, which are paleontology and geology. It's about what it costs, really, to escape that cage of expectation.
Then second, we'll dive deep into the central philosophical battle, rationalism versus raw fear.
Yeah, this is the core conflict. We're going to juxtapose the sharpest edge of modern science, antiseptic practice, huge surgical ambitions, the concept of deep geological time.
Against this local, almost contagious terror evoked by the Essex Serpent legend.
It's logic versus the abyss.
And finally, we will undertake what we're calling the anatomy of passion.
I like that.
This is where we analyze how the central male characters, Dr. Luke Garrett and Reverend William Ransome, how they approach life with this consuming, intense, almost terrifying energy.
Whether it's channeled through the surgeon's knife, trying to save a life, or through the moral certainty of the pulpit, trying to save a soul.
They are both, in their own ways, radical men of action. So let's begin with Cora Seaborne, because her story really is framed entirely by her escape. The sources, they jump right into the aftermath of this deeply difficult marriage to Michael Seaborne.
Who died of throat cancer, which is a key detail.
Right. So what is it about this marriage, and specifically Michael's influence, that's so critical to understanding where Cora goes next?
Well, the source material is, it's very blunt about it. It says Michael exerted a malign influence. He was a man just obsessed with maintaining perfect control and, surface appearance.
But not in a straightforward way.
No, not at all. He twisted those qualities into these instruments of quiet cruelty. He wasn't overtly violent, but his control was insidious. It was psychological.
The detail about the cravat really stands out.
It does, doesn't it? He was extremely fastidious, but he would deliberately wear a stained, pale silk cravat.
Why?
Seemingly just to introduce this tiny, persistent note of unease, a vulgarity among his guests.
Wow. So it's not just a fashion faux pas, it's a calculated act, a way of making everyone feel just a little bit off kilter.
Exactly. It implies this deeper, almost perverse pleasure in disrupting the very Victorian perfection he claimed to uphold. His was a tyranny of meticulous discomfort.
And that control wasn't just psychological, it actually manifested physically on Cora.
It did.
Yeah.
We learn about this extraordinary, ornate, thumb-length scar on her collarbone.
A replica of silver leaves pressed into her flesh. That detail is shocking. It's as if he was treating her body like a piece of art to be marked.
Or a ledger, as you said, sinking his signet ring into wax. It's the visible, tangible result of his cruelty. But what's so compelling is Cora's reaction to it.
Yeah, her reaction is key to her whole character, isn't it?
It is, because instead of the shame that Victorian society would have absolutely expected, a mark that suggests abuse or impropriety, She reclaims it.
She finds herself fond of it.
Which is just a stunning admission. And even more defiantly, she enjoys the rumor that starts circulating that the mark was a tattoo.
A sign of her unconventional nature. So she turns this scar of ownership into a symbol of her own defiant individuality.
It's a literal scar that becomes a metaphorical shield. It suggests that surviving his influence has, it's hardened her. It's enabled her to wear her past trauma almost as a badge of honor.
Or at least as evidence that she has her own identity, separate from what's expected of a London society wife.
And that's the first clue that Cora isn't just escaping grief. She is escaping suffocation.
So when Michael dies, her emotional state it's incredibly nuanced.
It really is. She experiences this profound sensation of lightness. She describes herself as being untethered from Newton's laws.
But she's careful to label that feeling. It's not happiness.
No, she calls it clear, undeniable relief.
And the source material really emphasizes that this relief exists side by side with grief. Why is that distinction so important?
Well, it just elevates the psychological complexity of the whole narrative. She acknowledges that however much she loathed him, Michael had, in her words, formed her, at least in part.
So the grief is human.
The grief is a sign of humanity, a recognition that a shared life has ended. But the relief is the absolute necessity of self-preservation. It shows this modern sensibility, this capacity to hold complex, even contradictory emotions.
She was relieved to be free of his force.
Exactly. And this whole search for a genuine, unconstrained identity is foreshadowed so powerfully by the epigraph used in the sources, the quote from Montaigne.
If you press me to say why I loved him, I can say no more than because he was he and I was I.
And that quote, which is often seen as this philosophical ideal of perfect friendship, of mutual recognition, here it's this deep, subtle hint of what Cora is truly seeking.
A relationship based on pure, radical individuality.
Precisely. Which is the dynamic she will eventually and unexpectedly find with the Reverend Ransome.
Okay, so moving from Cora to her immediate London circle, we meet a figure who is just as intense, but he channels his passion in a completely different direction.
Into the new world of Victorian medicine, Dr. Luke Garrett.
Known as the Imp.
And the nickname is just perfect because it captures his whole paradoxical nature. He's physically small, almost boyish for a 32-year-old, but he has this immense, urgent, almost frightening power.
The sources describe his loping, insistent gait, like he's always about to launch himself into action.
Yeah, and his intellectual ferocity is practically visible. He has this bulging brow that seems barely able to contain his thoughts. He's a man whose presence just defines the new, radical direction of medicine.
And his heroes, his intellectual heroes, they reflect that radicalism completely.
They do. We learned he reveres Ignaz Semmelweis and Jon Snow. He has a photograph of Snow in his meticulously clean operating room.
So for any listener who might need a quick refresher, can you just give us the context on Semmelweis?
Of course. Ignaz Semmelweis was the Hungarian physician who, decades earlier, pioneered the idea of antiseptic procedures, specifically washing hands with chlorinated lime to combat puerperal fever in maternity wards.
And his ideas were, what, revolutionary?
Revolutionary and widely mocked. He faced such severe professional ridicule that he eventually died in an asylum.
So Garrett's hero is literally a martyr to the cause of medical progress.
Absolutely. By revering Semmelweis, Garrett is aligning himself with the outsiders, the pioneers who defied the establishment for the sake of science and saving lives.
And Jon Snow.
Jon Snow represents the triumph of empirical data. He's the one who famously mapped the cholera outbreak in Soho to trace the source to the Broad Street pump.
So Garrett is firmly on the side of modern, empirical, and I guess often socially dangerous scientific truth.
He is. And the sources do this brilliant job of contrasting Garrett's internal urgency with the mechanical precision of London time.
Right, you get these vivid images.
Yeah.
The time ball dropping at Greenwich, bells chiming across the city.
Time being spent and squandered, the dark underground receiving passengers like so much raw material.
But Garrett is separate from that.
He is explicitly contrasted with it. He rides the Circle Line, trapped in this mechanical clockwork of the city. But internally, what's he doing? He's reciting the parts of the human heart to himself.
Left ventricle, right ventricle.
Superior vena cava. He's hoping this anatomical litany will slow his own anxious, overworked heart.
It shows that his true clock is biological, not industrial. His world is one of internal, critical urgency, and that makes him impatient, ambitious, and really fundamentally isolated.
And that biological urgency is crucial. But while he's obsessed with the human heart, we have to remember the other people anchoring Cora's domestic chaos.
Martha and Francis.
Right. Martha is Cora's calm, cool companion. The sources say her strong arm circled Cora's waist with this protective, almost possessive gesture that Garrett, with his professional jealousy, really dislikes.
And what makes Martha so important beyond just being an emotional anchor for Cora?
Her commitment is intensely social and political. It grounds the narrative in the urgent realities of Victorian London that go way beyond Cora's own intellectual quest. We know she reads an Englishwoman's review of social and industrial questions.
Her focus is London housing reform.
Squarely. The systemic injustices faced by the working poor. She's the anchor that links Cora's privileged escape to the necessity of social change happening right outside their window.
And then there's Francis, Cora's son, who represents a completely different kind of response to all this trauma and chaos.
Francis is intensely isolated and obsessive. He was moved to the upper room soon after his father's illness became frighteningly real.
And he copes by accumulating and arranging these treasures.
Yeah, a wad of dog fur, a piece of iron pyrite, a raven feather. And they're arranged in these complex, baffling patterns that only he understands.
And his reaction to his father's death is chillingly detached.
It is. He viewed it as a calamity, but one no worse than the loss of one of his treasures.
That comparison, it speaks volumes about his psychological defense. He's neutralizing life and death through this ritualistic objectification.
He's trying to impose order on the unpredictable reality of loss. And you hear it in his strange counting ritual on the stairs.
Here today, gone tomorrow.
It's this obsessive, babyish ritual, as Cora recognizes, even though he's 11. He's defined by his remoteness, his inscrutable tempers.
So this whole domestic environment, the repressed mother, the obsessive son, the volatile surgeons circling them, it really makes Cora's need to leave London feel less like a choice and more like a desperate imperative.
She has to escape, not just the memory of Michael, but the emotional disorder he left behind.
The move to Aldwinter is, as you say, necessitated by chaos, but it's fueled by these intellectual passions we've just introduced, and this section really is a deep dive into the extremes of Victorian endeavor. Let's start with Luke Garrett, because he's attempting the ultimate impossible surgical feat, stitching a human heart.
Garrett's ambition is just enormous, and the source material grounds it in years of solitary, obsessive preparation. We hear about his earlier anatomical passion.
This exquisitely rendered, miniaturized section of human stomach lining.
Yeah, created in his locked laboratory. It was sliced thin as paper, injected with ink to show the blood vessels, looking like bare branch trees in spring.
And he hoped someone would think it was as beautiful as I do. That suggests his ambition isn't just about saving lives, it's also about recognition, about his art being appreciated.
Oh, absolutely. It elevates his work to an artistic, almost spiritual endeavor. And all that preparation is put to the test by the Edward Burton case.
A young clerk, stabbed above the fourth rib.
The diagnosis was immediate and damning. A wound penetrating the pericardial sac. Historically, this was a death sentence. To even attempt to operate was considered professional suicide.
And the confrontation with the senior surgeon, Rawlings, so dramatic. He blocks the doorway screaming, "It is his heart! It is his heart!"
Because it wasn't just a physical impossibility, it was a philosophical taboo. The heart was seen as sacred, beyond the surgeon's profane knife.
But Garrett was determined.
He was. He had already secured the required and very painful permission from Burton's mother, telling her honestly that her son would die by morning otherwise.
And his reply to Rawlings is just chilling.
"You could not stop me if you tried." That line confirms he has crossed a point of no return.
And the surgical description that follows is, well, it's clinical, but it's so intensely visceral.
You have to detail the steps to appreciate the audacity of it. First, he had to use a fine bone saw to remove a section of the rib, just to open the cavity.
An unprecedented step in this context.
Totally. Then he reaches into the cavity, and with his hand angled just right, he slips it inside to cup the beating heart. He calls this the most intimate thing.
The intimacy of literally holding another human's life force in his hand. It's just staggering.
And the precision required next is almost unbelievable. He uses a curved needle threaded with catgut ligature, described as fine enough for wedding silk, to stitch the cut.
The choice of catgut is interesting, too.
It's a very forward-thinking choice. Unlike silk, which would remain as a foreign body and risk infection, catgut would eventually be absorbed by the body.
And the success is immediate and astonishing. Burton wakes up, complains about a sore throat, and sees the sunrise.
A miracle.
But what interests me most is the profound emotional aftermath for the surgeon himself.
This is where we see the intense cost of his ambition. Immediately after the successful stitch, Garrett just retreats. He hides in a linen cupboard, a small, dark, anonymous space.
And he's trembling violently.
Shaking so hard he has to make a straitjacket of his own arms to contain the reaction. And then he begins to cry.
But why? Why hide in a linen cupboard?
It suggests shame, or at least the deep cultural need to conceal what was seen as weakness. In the Victorian professional world, a surgeon was meant to be stoic, machine-like.
So this incredible act of skill and courage didn't lead to some triumphant celebration.
It led to physical and emotional collapse. He had crossed a boundary, defied God and man, and the profound realization of what he had achieved and what he had risked, it hit him like a physical blow. The crying is the psychological price of achieving a miracle.
The same kind of intensity that we see in Garrett's medical pursuit is mirrored in Martha's focus on social justice.
Yes.
Let's turn to her passionate socialist beliefs and her battle for the poor of London.
Martha's convictions are so deeply rooted in her family history. Her father was a trade unionist, and he revered Karl Marx. She often hears his creed recited. All that is solid melts into air, and all that is holy is profaned.
That's the language of revolution.
It is. She believes the entire Victorian system is fundamentally corrupt.
And her main focus is a critique of philanthropic housing, specifically the rules of the Peabody Trust. The sources say these rules were punishing poverty, but what does that actually mean?
So the Peabody Trust was established by a benevolent American financier, and it built these clean, modern housing blocks. However, to live there, tenants had to prove good character.
Okay, and good character meant what?
Strict rules. No drinking, no messy homes, prompt rent payment, and basically adherence to middle-class moral standards. Martha argues that this system doesn't actually help the most vulnerable.
It just rewards the deserving poor.
Precisely. Those who already possess the moral fiber of the middle class.
So she's arguing that poverty itself is a consequence of a failed system, not some moral failing that needs to be corrected through strict behavior.
Exactly. She asks Spencer, why can a wealthy man drink himself wretched on claret and port with no societal consequence, but a poor man who spends what little he has on cheap beer lacks the moral standing to sleep in a dry bed?
The hypocrisy.
Her anger is focused on the hypocrisy of using philanthropy to impose moral discipline.
It's a vicious cycle. If you're desperate and miserable, your behavior might reflect that, and then you're denied the basic housing that might lift you out of that desperation in the first place.
She condemns it, she says. If you are poor and miserable and behave as you might well expect a poor and miserable person to behave, then your sentence is more misery and more poverty.
She wants to uplift people without placing moral duties on inhabitants.
She's trying to stitch the social fabric back together, demanding a revolution in charitable thought.
And that passion is contagious. It even reaches the very shy George Spencer, Garrett's wealthy conscience.
Spencer is awkward, and he's deeply uncomfortable with his own privilege, but he has these deep feelings, especially for Martha's cause.
And he actually takes action.
He does. Spurred by her relentless critique, he seeks out Charles Ambrose to discuss how to use the Spencer Trust, his own source of despised wealth, to fund housing that aligns with Martha's socialist ideals.
He wants to help the poor without moral duties. It's his own kind of hesitant surgical move on the social body.
That's a great way to put it.
So if Garrett is reforming the physical body and Martha is reforming the social body, where does Cora fit in? Her quest, as she relocates to Aldwinter, is a parallel intellectual pursuit, but it's focused on deep time and geological history.
Her focus shifts completely to the estuary. She's seeking a living fossil, something that defies the established chronological order.
And her inspiration is the legendary Mary Anning.
Yes. A poor working-class woman who found her first fossil at 12 and became this pioneering, self-taught paleontologist. Anning called her plesiosaur a sea dragon.
She linked science and myth seamlessly.
And Cora sees this search for a species that might outwit extinction as a direct conscious rejection of her stifling London past. Michael thought her time was better spent reading The Lady to check on skirt shaves.
But now, freed by widowhood, Cora finds liberation.
She has traded those societal expectations, which she now sees as a form of blindness, for liberty and the relentless pursuit of geological time.
And she says it so powerfully. The wonderful thing about being a widow is that really you're not obliged to be much of a woman anymore.
Which is just a radical statement for the time. She's claiming an intellectual space that was previously denied to her sex. She fully intends to leave a scientific legacy.
Even if she has to drag a living sea monster out of the Essex clay to get her name on the wall of the British Museum.
She is trying to outwit her own extinction, the societal extinction of her intellect.
Aw.
All three of them, Garrett, Martha, and Cora, they're all pursuing these radical endeavors, demanding that the world conform to their vision.
Okay, so let's make that crucial geographical and philosophical shift now. We're moving out of that urban crucible of intellectual ambition and into the raw, muddy reality of Aldwinter.
This is where the cutting edge of science slams directly into deep, entrenched rural superstition.
The stage for the ultimate conflict.
It is, and the environment itself plays a critical role. The stage for the Serpent's return was set 8 years earlier by a genuine historical event.
The Essex earthquake of 1884.
A massive, sudden rupture that struck at 18 minutes past 9 precisely and lasted about 20 seconds.
And its impact was devastating. It reduced villages like Verley and Wivenhoe to rubble. It literally shook the foundation of the world the locals knew.
And specifically, it disrupted the ancient underlying Paleozoic rock, geological material laid down 500 million years before.
That detail about the Paleozoic rock is brilliant because it connects Cora's scientific passion for deep time with the local terror of sudden disaster.
And this natural catastrophe was immediately translated into myth. The locals blamed it for shaking something loose in the Blackwater. This revived the ancient legend, creating strange news out of Essex.
So what are the key details of this revived legend?
Well, the creature is described as implacable, vast, scaled, more dragon than serpent, sometimes seen sunning its wings. But the fear wasn't abstract.
No, it was cemented by a specific terrifying incident on New Year's Eve.
The story of the drowned man.
Right.
A young man, having drunk the old year down, goes for a dip in the estuary. And the sources describe him being seized by dread, feeling ransacked, emptied of all goodness.
Feeling he deserved justice from the monster.
And was found later, naked on the saltings, drowned, with his head turned almost 180 degrees.
A physical impossibility. It suggests a demonic or supernatural force. And that fixed look of dread in his eyes is what cemented the terror for the community.
Oh, absolutely. It wasn't just a drowning, it was a terrifying final encounter. And the legend instantly became this catch-all explanation for every misfortune.
Missing calves, sprained ankles.
A child found hiding in a cupboard. Everything became attributable to the serpent. The monster functions as the organizing principle for every bit of chaos.
And this superstition, it has historical roots.
It does. We learn that Thomas Taylor, the crippled man, confirms the history. He tells Cora about these old pamphlets from 1669, warning of a monstrous serpent with eyes like a sheep.
So this fear is almost intrinsic to the area, a kind of cultural geology.
And Cracknell, the hermit living at World's End, he amplifies this. He attributes a sickness in Fettlewell, which left 3 dead on New Year's Eve, not to poor sanitation or natural illness.
But to the serpent's urine poisoning the water pump, the myth is totalizing.
It is. And this intense, paralyzing fear is the environment into which Cora, the scientist, and Reverend William Ransome, the rational theologian, arrive.
Ransome is the man charged with shepherding this terrified flock.
And he's described as too thoughtful for a parson. He's devoted to his small parish, but he rejects the serpent myth entirely. He calls it Chinese whispers and a failure of faith.
He believes the fear is a consequence of letting go of the rope that tethers us to everything that's good and certain.
His theological position is essentially a demand for order. His God is a God of reason and order, and he sees it as his duty to bring his congregation back to comfort and certainty, away from what he calls folly and darkness.
But his devotion to order is immediately undermined by his chaotic, accidental first meeting with Cora.
It's the perfect introduction. Charles Ambrose had arranged a formal meeting, but Cora meets Will by chance near the estuary.
And she sees this shabby, muddy, rough-looking man trying to save a sheep from the lake.
She mistakes him for an ill-formed Adam, or a vagrant, noting his slow Essex vowels.
Oh.
And Will, in turn, sees her as a shrieking, commanding harridan, a total inversion of the gentlewoman he expected.
And they work together, pulling this terrified sheep from the mud.
He do. Will even gets a cut from the sheep's flailing hoof. And it's only later, upon their proper introduction at the rectory, when they're both cleaned up, that the sheer absurdity of it all hits them.
And that shared, uncontrollable laughter. That's the moment the intellectual connection is forged, isn't it?
It is absolutely the foundation of their dynamic. Cora is so tickled she confesses, "I do feel rather sheepish," which just prompts another wave of gleeful laughter from Will.
That moment of shared, undignified merriment, it just cuts through all the social and intellectual barriers.
It establishes this immediate, complicated, and deeply equal dynamic between the radical scientist and the rational theologian.
And what's so fascinating is that the serpent legend is physically woven into the fabric of Ransome's own church.
It is. The All Saints Church has this carving, a serpent with wings folded on its back, coiled around the arm of a restoration pew. And it's worn smooth by centuries of congregants touching it.
Will sees it as a profound religious failure.
A blasphemy, a literal manifestation of folly and darkness. He openly threatens to take a chisel to it, to rid his church of this physical embodiment of superstition.
Though his wife, Stella, protects it.
She does. And this sets the stage for their central conflict, this intense dialogue that takes place inside the church itself.
Cora immediately challenges his faith head-on.
She argues that religion is fundamentally a sort of blindness, a choice to be mad. She insists she traded it in for liberty and science.
She champions Lyell and Darwin and asks him, if God chose to reveal himself through deep time and slow evolution, is it so strange, after all, to think he's choosing to do so again, to call us to repentance?
She's daring him to either integrate the monster into his theology or surrender to her science. And she makes it explicitly personal.
She admits she essentially sold her soul to live as she must, with freedom to think the thoughts that come, not to let them run along tracks someone else set.
This is the core of her radical widowhood. Freedom to think, freedom to hunt.
But Will's counter-argument is deeply persuasive, too. He questions the stability of scientific theories themselves.
Yeah, he points out that new theories appear tomorrow, only to be discredited a decade later. He asks her, what use is it to try and stand on quicksand?
He maintains that the constant flux of science is an inadequate anchor for the human spirit when it's faced with true primal terror.
He insists that seeking illumination through the constant revision of fact just leads you back to folly and darkness when people desperately need certainty.
And yet, despite this fundamental opposition, they recognize a shared intensity in each other.
They do. Cora notes, we both speak of illuminating the world, but we have different sources of light, you and I.
And their exchange culminates in this dramatic, symbolic toast, raising their cups to see who first blows out the other's candle.
It's an intellectual duel, mutually respected, mutually challenging, recognizing the absolute consuming passion each holds for their own source of truth.
But the section ends on a truly chilling, much darker note. It brings us back to Cracknell, the mad hermit who embodies the raw, seductive power of fear.
Cracknell confronts Cora in the church shadows, and he sees past her intellectual rationalism. He senses her true, almost perverse hunger for the monster.
He saw her tears during the service and her intellectual fervor, and he croons that he knows her wickedness.
He suggests her rational pursuit is just a mask for a deep emotional craving. He says she secretly hopes for the monster. You dream of it, you listen for it, you wait for it, you hope for it.
And he presses her against the pew, asking if she seeks punishment.
And this is the psychological core of the serpent myth. It's not just fear of the unknown. It's the human need for a defining, terrifying narrative, for judgment.
And Cora steadies herself, recalling her earlier thought from her marriage. I know punishment. I've learned how to stand it.
And as he speaks, he stumbles. His long coat opens to show a black leather lining, suggesting the flap of wings. Cracknell isn't just a mad local. He is the dark, primal mirror to Cora's scientific curiosity, confirming that her search is fundamentally driven by an emotional, almost masochistic need for definition. So we have journeyed deep into the psychological and intellectual geography of late Victorian England. What really stands out here is the intense pressure cooker that this society created.
The rigid expectations of marriage, the constraints on women's ambition, the stifling professional hierarchies.
Right. And all this pressure forced these dynamic, passionate characters to seek release in extremes.
That release manifests in Garrett's ambition to perform a miracle by literally stitching the human heart. That's an internal, physical rebellion.
And in Martha, we see the external political rebellion, the relentless dismantling of social class barriers, trying to achieve social justice.
And in Cora, it's the intellectual rebellion, seeking geological deep time and extinct species in a remote Essex estuary.
The Essex Serpent itself serves not just as a monster, but as the crucible for all these ambitions. It's the testing ground where these intensely rational, modern passions are forced to confront primal, ancient fear.
And the deeply held faith of a man like William Ransome who is just seeking ordered certainty.
Exactly. Every character's quest for knowledge is simultaneously a desperate quest for a meaningful framework that can withstand the chaos of a rapidly changing world.
And you've witnessed how these characters, in their quest for knowledge and personal freedom, often willingly stepped into societal disgrace or professional peril.
Hmm.
Cora, in her appearance and ambition, rejected her obligations to elegance and grief. She embraced her scandal.
Garrett risked his entire professional reputation and faced, physical and emotional collapse with his surgical feat.
And Martha willfully embraced the disgrace of radical socialist politics, alienating her own class.
They all chose intellectual and moral authenticity over social comfort, and in that choice, they embodied the true spirit of rebellion against the restrictive Victorian age.
Their individual passions, for the heart, for the poor, for the deep past, are all interconnected attempts to find truth outside the drawing rooms of London.
They are.
So as you reflect on this deep dive, consider this final provocative thought for further musing. If the ultimate fear of the late Victorian era was the dissolution of all defining narratives, the decay of God, the uncertainty of science, the collapse of social order, is the creation or pursuit of a new tangible monster, whether that's a living fossil or a revolutionary surgical feat, simply a necessary human attempt to impose structure and meaning onto chaos. Is the ultimate serpent not the creature in the Blackwater, but the absolute terrifying fear of living without any defining narrative at all? Think about where you find your certainty in a chaotic world.